In a small town called Lakewood, nestled among dense forests, lived a group of friends: Jack, Emily, Kyle, and Sarah. Although their town was quiet and peaceful, in recent weeks, strange things had begun to happen in the town. Every night, eerie sounds were heard in the woods and locals began to disappear without a trace. One night, as his friends gathered around a campfire on the outskirts of town, Kyle told of a legend he had heard from his grandfather. According to the legend, there was a werewolf who lived in the woods of Lakewood and came out to hunt during full moons. He was a treacherous and terrible creature capable of taking the form of any man. It was said that his victims not only disappeared but also turned into him, becoming part of his sinister world. Sarah, always a lover of the mystical, offered to spend the night in the woods to find out the truth. After much debate, the friends agreed. They took flashlights, matches, and some food, then set off into the woods. As they went deeper into the thicket, the forest suddenly became quiet. The sounds of the night were gone, and only silence remained, broken only by the crackle of their footsteps on dry branches. There was an ominous atmosphere around them, and each of them could feel the tension building. After a few hours of wandering, they decided to stop and make camp. Emily suggested telling scary stories to lighten the mood. They took turns sharing their fears until it was time for Kyle. He hesitated and finally began to tell his version of the werewolf legend. There is a belief that a werewolf can see the fear of its victims. The more afraid they are, the stronger it becomes, he said, his voice trembling with excitement. At that moment, the forest was filled with sounds again. The crunching of twigs and strange howls could be heard in the distance. Jack and Sarah glanced over, but Kyle continued. They say he can take on the guises of the people you love. He makes you believe it's them, and then attacks. Suddenly someone screamed. It was Emily. She was pointing at a dark silhouette standing between the trees. The friends froze with horror. The silhouette slowly approached, and they saw that it was a man, but something about his movements was wrong. His arms were longer and his eyes glowed with an eerie light. "Run!" Jack shouted, and they rushed in different directions trying to find cover. Sarah and Kyle ran towards the old shack they had spotted earlier. When they got there, they locked the doors and huddled against the wall, listening to the sounds outside. Suddenly the hut was filled with shadows. They saw Emily run inside, but something was wrong with her. Her eyes were glowing and the smile on her face looked sinister. "Emily?" Sarah whispered, stepping back. "Is that you?" "I've come to help you," she said. But her voice sounded different. It wasn't the voice they knew, it was the voice of a werewolf. Kyle and Sarah realized that this wasn't the Emily they knew. They tried to open the window, but it jammed. At that time, Emily came closer. Her body began to distort and she started to turn into a creepy creature. With horror, they realized that they needed to survive at all costs. Kyle found an old broom and, holding it as a weapon, lunged at the werewolf, trying to divert its attention. Sarah, meanwhile, was looking for a way out. The werewolf tore towards Kyle, and that's when Sarah found an old lamp. She turned it on, and the bright light blinded the creature for a moment. That gave them a chance. They ran out of the cabin and rushed deep into the woods without stopping. The night was dark and they didn't know where they were running, but they could hear the werewolf chasing them, its ominous howl echoing in the air. Suddenly, they came upon a cliff. There was a swift stream below. Kyle grabbed Sarah's hand and they jumped into the river, hoping it would save them from pursuit. As the water enveloped them, they felt something pass by, but in the darkness they couldn't make out what it was. They surfaced and after wading ashore found themselves in a safe place. Despite their fear and terror, they looked at each other with understanding. Emily was gone and they knew they would never forget that night. The legend of the werewolf lived on, and perhaps he still roamed the woods of Lakewood waiting for his next victim.